Alright, let's talk about Pluribus episode 9, because this episode doesn't just end the season, it quietly changes what kind of show this actually is. Up until now, Pluribus has felt like a slow-burn sci-fi story about survival, identity, and what it means to remain human in a world that has already decided humanity is inefficient. Episode 9 takes all of that groundwork and finally forces its main character to stop reacting and start choosing. And that choice is what makes this finale so unsettling. The episode is titled La Chica o el Mundo, which translates to the girl or the world, and on paper that sounds like a pretty familiar setup. Save the person you love or save everyone else. We've seen that dilemma 100 times, but what makes Pluribus interesting is that it twists that idea into something much more uncomfortable. Because in this case, the world being saved might not actually be worth living in. At the center of all this is Carol Sturka, who at this point is probably the loneliest person left on the planet. She's one of the very few humans who hasn't joined the collective consciousness known as the Joined. And while the show has gone out of its way to make the Joined seem peaceful, calm, and even kind, it has also made something very clear from the beginning. The Joined are happy because they no longer have a choice. Conflict doesn't exist for them. Doubt doesn't exist. Individual desire doesn't exist. And while that sounds great on the surface, especially in a world that's already fallen apart, Carol can feel that something essential has been stripped away. Every conversation she has with a joined person feels just a little too smooth. Every emotional response feels slightly pre-approved. That tension becomes even more complicated through her relationship with Zosha. On the surface, this relationship feels like the emotional heart of the season. It's warm, supportive, and it offers Carol something she hasn't had in a long time, which is connection without fear. For a moment, it almost feels like the show is suggesting that maybe the Joined aren't so bad after all. But episode 9 pulls that illusion apart very carefully. Carol discovers that the Joined have plans for her frozen eggs, and what's important here is not just what they plan to do, but how they think about it. There's no sense that Carol's consent matters. From their perspective, they're creating life that will exist without suffering, without pain, without loneliness. So any personal discomfort along the way is seen as irrelevant. This is where the episode makes its real point. The Joined don't see themselves as villains because they genuinely believe they've solved the problem of human existence. And that belief is exactly what makes them terrifying. The breakup between Carol and Zosha isn't explosive or dramatic, and that's what makes it hit harder. Zosha isn't cruel. She isn't manipulative. She simply cannot understand why Carol would value autonomy over guaranteed happiness. And Carol, in that moment, finally understands that love inside the hive mind only exists as long as it aligns with the collective's goals. That realization pushes Carol toward the other extreme, which is where Maneusis comes in. Maneusis is the last other unjoined human we know of, and he's basically the embodiment of what happens when resistance turns into obsession. He believes the Joined must be stopped at any cost, and unlike Carol, he's already accepted that mass death might be part of that cost. His work on disrupting the hive mind through radio frequencies is important because it proves the Joined aren't invulnerable. Their strength comes from connection, and anything that relies on connection can be interrupted. But the episode never frames Maneusis as a clean alternative. He isn't a hero. He's angry, unstable, and completely willing to destroy the world if it means preserving the idea of freedom. This leaves Carol trapped between two impossible options. On one side, a peaceful world without individuality. On the other, freedom that may only exist after catastrophic violence. And that's where the title of the episode really comes into focus. The girl isn't just Zosha. She represents personal connection, chosen love, and individual identity. The world isn't humanity in the traditional sense. It's the hive mind's version of humanity, where suffering has been removed by removing choice. So Carol isn't choosing between selfish love and heroic sacrifice. She's choosing which version of existence should continue. That choice becomes horrifyingly real in the final moments of the episode, when a helicopter arrives carrying a massive crate. Inside that crate is an atom bomb, and the show makes it very clear that this is not symbolic. This is not a bluff. This is real, world-ending power. What matters most about that ending isn't what Carol plans to do with the bomb, because the show deliberately refuses to answer that. What matters is that Carol is now willing to hold that power at all. She has crossed from survival into agency, and from agency into something much darker. This is where Pluribus really earns its comparison to Vince Gilligan's earlier work. Just like Breaking Bad, the transformation doesn't happen all at once. Carol doesn't suddenly become a villain. She becomes someone who believes that the absence of a clean solution justifies crossing lines that once felt unthinkable. The joint removes suffering by removing freedom. Manusis preserves freedom by accepting suffering on a massive scale. Carol now stands between them with a weapon that guarantees destruction no matter how it's used. And that's the real question the finale leaves us with. Not whether hive minds are evil, and not whether violence is justified, but whether a world without pain is worth living in if it costs us the ability to choose who we are. Episode 9 doesn't give us answers, and it's not trying to. Instead, it ends the season by forcing us to sit with the same impossible dilemma Carol is facing. A dilemma where every path forward demands sacrifice, and where doing nothing may be just as destructive as doing something. That's why this finale works. It doesn't rely on spectacle or shock alone. It relies on the slow realization that there may not be a version of the future that feels morally clean anymore. And going into Season 2, that's a far more interesting place to be than any traditional cliffhanger. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.